Hello, my name is Dzindzi, and welcome to this series of lectures on comprehensive chess endings. Chess endgames are very, very important part of the games. Well, we know that openings are very important because if you don't play openings correctly, if you play them really badly, you won't make it to the end game. But after you learned your openings more or less, so you passed the opening part and you are in middle game, very frequently in the middle game we have the continuations that will lead by force to the ending, to the end game. And then a lot of times we have to play this end game and we have to try to figure out whether we are winning or losing or whatever. So and what helps a lot of experienced chess players, before they get to endgame, they would know already whether endgame is won or it's a draw, if there is a result can be predicted by the nature of endgame, by the type of the endgame. So we have to, in order for them, they don't know it by experience, they know it because they learned certain endgames in a way that they can predict what the result is going to be. So let's start learning those endgames, the ones that we don't have to figure once we get there how to play. We want to know how to play these endgames before we get there, because that will help you to decide whether you want to go to that endgame or not. If you don't know the endgame is lost, and it is lost, you don't want to get there. So what should we start? We should start from very beginning, which is very elementary and most basic endgames, pawn endings, king and pawns versus king, bear king, or king and pawns. So king and pawn endings are the easiest type of endings because almost every, not almost, practically every chess, every pawn ending is, you can know what the result is. Every pawn ending, well, there are some rook endgames and minor piece endgames where you can say one side has an advantage or the other side has an advantage, or position is equal. But that's not the way it is in pawn endings. In pawn endings, there is a win, lose, or draw. It's a very exact science and very predicted results for experienced and strong players. So the elementary ending, the first thing you have to know when you start playing chess and will start learning openings, is king and pawn versus king. Well, let's run quickly through those type of endgames. And we're going to learn what opposition is. So, for example, here is the position. And in this position, white is going that way. So it does not really matter whose move is it. It is a draw. It is a draw. All black has to do is to know one simple rule of opposition. They play king e6 after e5, king e7, king d5, king d7, d5, king e7, and king e5. In this position, there's only one move that draws, and black must make that move. Black must play king e8. And now, regardless whether white goes king f6 or king d6, black will play king d8 or king f8, which leads to a draw in both cases. So remember, here is the opposition on king f6, king f8. You see kings opposing each other, and if it's whoever is on the move is suffering from the opposition. Now to white's move, that's why white cannot win. If white pushes e7, king e8, and after king e6 it's a stalemate. However, if it's black's move, then black loses. So because they lose the opposition, they have to stand in king versus king in front of king, and if black has to move king e8, e7, king d7, king f7, of course they lose the game. So the opposition, this is the elementary and very basic example of the opposition. Now let's look at the other opposition. Again, I quickly want to go. I don't want to dedicate too much time to king and pawn versus king, because there are many different ways you can learn it, or you can figure it out even by yourself. Well, here is the opposition, and the result here is white moves. White wins if it's black's move, and it's a draw if it's white's move. If white's move, black holds the opposition, and wherever white goes, black can follow the opposition. Now, but if white pushes the pawn, then black draws by playing king d6 if white does not have king d4 move. So the opposition here is important, not to let white's king in ahead of white's pawn to kick black out of the central file. For example, if it's black's move in this position, in original position, black loses no matter what they do. On king e6, white goes king c5, and on king c6, king e5. And how it may continue now, king d7, and white plays king d5. This is opposition number 2. And black loses. King e7, king c6. And now on king e6, white goes d4, and white queens by force. On king d8, we go d5. Now, why this rule always works? Now on king d8, king d6, and you see black's move, and black loses because it's their move. Well, there is one rule. We know that this position, we just looked, this type of position, if white's move, it's a draw. We put everything one square up. If white's move is a draw. However, if pawn is here on d2, white's pawn, then white wins no matter whose move is it, because we know why black loses if it's their move, and if it's white's move, white goes d3. So if white does not have spare move, it's a draw. Again, we push one square down, it's a draw, no matter whose move it, well, only if it's white's move, of course, because black holds the opposition. Very important to know, if the king is on a back rank, this position is an exception. Now white wins, no matter whose move is it. Okay, we know why white wins if it's black's move, and if it's white's move, they just go king c6, king c8, and d6, forcing to play king d8 and d7. After king e7, king goes to c7, white wins easily. So opposition in those cases is important in a position where there are no other move but the king move. And when black's king is not on a very back rank. If black can achieve position where it's white's move, it's a draw. If in this given position, black's move, black loses. This is very basic. Now this goes for any pawn. The rule applies to any pawn from B to G. With a rook pawn, of course, there are no rules. Black can just go to the corner, and there is no opposition can do anything. Black just goes king a8 and king b8. So there is any move they make in the corner of the board will lead to a draw. This is king and pawn versus king, bare king. It's very elementary, very simple, and every position you can create from there is either definite win or definite draw for one side, or loss, obviously. It's a definite, you can clearly predict result. There are some subtle type of positions, like, well, for example, king on g4 and king on pawn on g4, king e1, and king on c7. If it's a white's move, this is a little bit subtle position. We know if white just goes king e2, king d6, king f3, king e5, and king g3, king f6, and king h4, king g6, it's a draw. But however, white can win here if they go king f2, king d7, king g3, king e6, king h4, and after king f6, king h5. You see, here opposition is lost by black, because in order to stop white from going king h6, they have to go king g7, and then we reach the position after king g5, where is the opposition? Black is on the move, so they lose. So this is the very basic and very easy. It's also complete coverage of king and pawn versus king. Okay, here is another position where black is on the move, and you see if black goes to c6, they lose after king to e5, and if black goes to e6, then after king c5, they're still gonna lose the f pawn. But what is the result? It's a draw anyway. It's a draw anyway, because black is not fighting back. They just abandon the f pawn. They go king e7, king d5, and king e8. After king e6, they go king f8. And one rule only black has to know. Black has to play around their king around f7 square, and wait when white plays king takes f5, and then they're gonna go king f7, and we have an opposition we just talked about, and it's a draw. One more position, black is on the move, and black is losing. Now, what is difference between this position and the other we just looked? Because when black loses a pawn, and it's white's move in the opposition, but we said this is an exception. Opposition does not, rule of the opposition does not apply when black's king is on the back rank. Black is losing now, no matter whose move is it. White plays king e6, king e8, f6, king f8, f7, and white wins easily. Now this is this position with a pawn, black pawn on f6 is lost, and position, if we move it one square up, then it's a draw. But here is the very interesting position. Black is on the move. Is this a win or draw for white? White looks like white is penetrating, but this is a draw. This is a lot more complicated version of the opposition. Black goes king e6, and white goes king c5. And what we're going to see, now we see the mirror image of the opposition. Well, right here in the original position, we have vertical opposition. Now you're going to see two different types of oppositions. After king e6, king c7, king c5, black goes king e7. You see the diagonal type of opposition. And white has to try to penetrate to g6. Unless they penetrate on g6, they will never going to win. Now on king d5, they go king d7, and now it's white's move, so no opposition. And on king c6, white is going to go king e6. And now we reached horizontal opposition, which is also draw, king c7, king e7, king c6, king e6. And on king c5, switch to the diagonal opposition. And on king d5, king d7. You see the opposition may be vertical, diagonal, horizontal. And here, black loses one opposition, but they're lucky enough to regain the opposition horizontally after white plays king c6 and king e6. So white cannot penetrate to g6, so it's a draw. This is very interesting example of the opposition. Position is a draw. Here is one interesting position we're going to look at. White to move. White goes this way. So if white plays king takes c6, black goes king c8, and this is an obvious draw. But however this position is winning for white, they can go king to d6. Now white is threatening b7 and b8 queen. And after king c8, now they're going to play king takes c6. And now they win very easily. King b8, b7, king a7, king c7. And it's all over. It's an easy win for white. So that's this is another example of the opposition. Now opposition, so it's a very important in pawn endings. However, there is another very, very important, a few other very important rules in pawn endings. One of them is an outside pass pawn. Well, let me give you the brief example of outside pass pawn. Well, here is one pawn. Here are two pawns. Well, actually two, and here is three pawns. Here is the position. The position is absolutely winning for white. And as a rule, I don't know, maybe 90% of the pawn endings where one side has outside pass pawn, maybe over 90, I would say closer to like 95, 98 maybe, percent of the position where one side has an outside pass pawn, they are winning. This is an easy win for white. What they do, they try to penetrate with the king, and when black stops, they have pawn to push a4. That's going to distract black's king. And after king e5, white is going to penetrate and clear whole king side. White is going to win every black's pawn, and they're going to make a queen. This is the outside pass pawn is a decoy pawn, which white is going to push to force opponent's king move to that side, and then your king will penetrate and clean up opponent's pawns. So this is very important rule on outside pass pawns.